Welcome to Kids Learning Lab, a learning podcast made just for kids.
In this episode of Kids Learning Lab, we'll be exploring the American Revolution, when the United States of America became its own country, separating from Britain. But before we start this episode, I'd like to mention that Kids Learning Lab's 3rd birthday was on last Sunday. Thanks for everyone for supporting this podcast by listening. Also, you can vote for the next episode by going to kidslearninglab.com/vote. More details before the end of this episode. And if you want free bonus content with every single episode like this one, sign up for the newsletter, which is free at news.kidslearninglab.com. Now, enjoy this episode. The American Revolution was a full war between America and Britain. Before the Revolution, America was just a part of Britain. There were 13 British colonies. Each colony had its own government, but all of the colonies were ruled by the King of Britain. People could vote in small colony governments, but they could not vote in British elections. People held different jobs in the colonies. Some people were farmers, some ran businesses and sold stuff, and others worked in cities. Even though they lived far from Britain, they still had to follow British laws. Now, let's talk about why the colonists got angry and decided to revolt against Britain. The trouble started with money. Britain was currently in a war against France, and Britain needed money. So, the British government decided to tax the colonists in America. Tax is when you buy something, but you need to pay a small amount to the government. For example, when you buy a $5 sandwich, you usually have to pay around $5.40, but only $5 goes to the store. The 40 cents goes to the government. Even when adults get paid, if they get paid $1,000, they usually have to pay $80 to the government. The first tax the British put on the Americans was the stamp tax. It taxed newspapers and even playing cards. This meant whenever someone bought a newspaper, they had to pay some to the government. Colonists got mad because they had to pay the government money for no reason. Later taxes taxed tea, glass, and paper. Americans got really mad at the British for doing this. Britain also passed rules that made it so the Americans were required to give food and shelter to British soldiers if they entered their house. A lot of Americans got mad. In 1773, a group of colonists dumped a whole ship of tea boxes into the ocean to protest the tea taxes. This was called the Boston Tea Party. Because of the Boston Tea Party, Britain created laws that didn't allow anyone to ship from Boston Harbor, and they also took away small government power, so all of the colonies were directly ruled by Britain. In 1774, colonists created a meeting called the First Continental Congress to respond to Britain. The first fighting happened in 1775 in 2 cities called Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Colonists that fought were called Minutemen. These people were volunteers, which means they didn't get paid for their work. They were called Minutemen because they had to come in minutes so they could defend against Britain when battles started. In 1776, the colonies created the Second Continental Congress. One person, Thomas Jefferson, who went to the meeting, wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence stated that America was a new country. On July 4th, the Declaration was approved. That's why we celebrate Independence Day on the 4th of July. Before we continue with the war, I want you to hear about my new book called Python Learning Lab. Python Learning Lab is a book about coding in Python. Python is a very simple programming language, and it's easy to get started coding. Even kids can learn coding with this book. But why should you or your kids learn to code? Coding gives you understanding of how apps, games, and websites work, and you can even make your own. How would you like to have your own video game or website? Coding also gives you logical thinking skills. If you want to learn how to code easily, just visit kidslearninglab.com/python. Kids Learning Lab is also on Amazon. Again, that's kidslearninglab.com/python. Now, let's get back to learning about the Revolutionary War. Now, let's talk about some famous people in the Revolution before we get to the actual war. First, there's George Washington. He led the entire Continental Army. He had to manage soldiers, food, and freezing winters. Next, there's King George III. He was the British king during the war. He wanted to keep America British. Third, we have Benjamin Franklin, who convinced France to support America. There's also Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. And finally, Alexander Hamilton, who was an assistant of Washington, founded the U.S. money system. Now, let's look at some key battles in the war. One of the earliest fights was at Bunker Hill in 1775. The Americans lost, but they proved that they could fight the biggest army in the world, Great Britain. Another big American victory happened at Saratoga in 1777. It convinced France to support the Americans. The last major battle was Yorktown in 1781. Washington and French forces trapped the British general, whose name was Cornwallis. The British surrendered. The war ended in 1783 when America and Britain signed the Treaty of Paris, where British agreed that the U.S. was its own country. Before we end this episode, I'd like to tell you that you can vote for the next episode coming on January 11th, 2026. There are 4 options. A. The Civil War. B. Ancient South American civilizations. C. The California Gold Rush. And D. Ancient Greece and Greek mythology. You can choose the next episode now by going to kidslearninglab.com/vote. Again, that's kidslearninglab.com/vote. The next episode will be based on the winner of the vote. You won't be able to vote after New Year's, so choose your topic. See you next year! Thanks for listening to this episode, and don't forget to share Kids Learning Lab with your friends and family.